we talk about planning officials, basically the people that make decisions. Now I don't mean to suggest, and you'll see in a few minutes, hopefully something that takes away the notion that we think the professional planner should be making this. We do not. Planning is a public process. The planning officials are very important, but we're pointing out the lack of standardization as to who that is. Most small communities, the elected officials will be the local planning agency. And that many times is a good reason. They don't have enough meetings going on to justify having a planning commission. Or they can't afford to do that, to have a number of different agencies that meet periodically. But the result of that is that there's no separation between the elected body, which also must approve the plan eventually, and the recommending body, which is the local planning agency. There's some other organizations here, the zoning boards and so forth, fall into these categories as well. Now, let me stop for a minute and ask you if there are questions about the legal stuff or the organization stuff, and generally what Chapter 163 says. What I want to talk about now is, given all those rules are in place and all those checklists that are there, how do we actually achieve good planning? So let me stop and see if there are questions about what we said before. Okay. You may remember one of the slides I showed you a few minutes ago showed this diagram of the My Region area, the 6 counties in East Central Florida. And this was a depiction of how the business as usual population would be projected for that 2060 population that was 50 years out under the model that we developed at the University of Florida. In other words, business as usual. Just keep doing it the same way. How do we change that? Is that, well, one, is that an acceptable vision? The MyRegion.org people did not think so. I suspect if you analyzed it too, you would probably have some reservations about whether this was an acceptable vision, because there's a lot of what we would refer to as sprawl in that concept. What they suggested was something that was much more compact. Remember that compact design concept and so forth. And so how would we achieve this? I will tell you that I think the business as usual version is very likely, that's a very plausible version. In fact, we see that occurring virtually every day. So how do you turn that into something like this? Now, again, if you want to get some sense of what went on the study, I urge you to look at the myregion.org. It's a very good regional concept. But in effect, moves toward, let's see if there are not some ways in which we can achieve a better result if we're going to have those 36 million people in Florida. There are several, and this is where I really condensed my presentation from what I usually do. I want to simply suggest that there are some ways we now think about planning that go beyond what Chapter 163 says to us. Chapter 163 is really a checklist. It says you got to have a future land use element, you got to have these things in it, you have to have transportation. So doesn't mean it's any good. Doesn't mean it's a good plan. As over the last 20 years or so, I would say, the planning dialogue has begun to change a bit in terms of trying to define what we think it takes to build livable communities. One of the concepts is something called new urbanism. Sometimes and it suggests that there is a transect. There are places that should be urban. There are places that should be essentially preserved. And that we have a number of different types of density, different types of development that occur in different places. And that we should be able to define for a region what those places are. That was very much what the map from myregion.org was beginning to do. In other words, these would flow from a suburban type to a general urban to an urban center to urban core. And we've also, you've probably heard a term called smart growth. Usually when I say that, somebody says, well, what have we been doing? Dumb growth? And we use terms, they tend to be co-opted and explained and often then dismissed. But if you actually look at what smart growth is talking about, I think it starts to make some sense. There are actually 10 principles. I'm just going to quickly identify what those are. One is that we should be encouraging community and stakeholder participation. You might have gotten the impression from all this stuff I said, well, you better have a bunch of professionals that do this because it's too complex. It doesn't work like that. You need the professionals, but to help you achieve the vision, we need community and stakeholder collaboration. We also need to have a principle of preserving open space, farmland, natural beauty, environmental areas. We also believe it's important that we strengthen and develop direct development toward existing communities. The existing places have value. They should be recognized and strengthened. A variety of transportation choice. One of the things that's really been occurring in the last several years is a movement toward mobility as a concept in transportation, meaning moving people as opposed to just moving cars, and this notion of variety of transportation choices for them. A range of housing opportunities and choices, not just single family, but other types as well. Walkable neighborhoods, mixing land uses, compact design, and distinctive, attractive communities with a sense of place. The original Chapter 163, and even today, it doesn't really emphasize it, had nothing about community character. Many communities are changing that, and you're now seeing in comprehensive plan a community character element, much more interest in design in urban form. And that's particularly necessary if you're talking about neighborhoods and talking mixed use, housing choice, transportation. And then finally, making development decisions predictable, fair, and cost-effective. Now, I have a whole 2 hours on that. I won't do that to you, about what that means. But the point is, rather than simply thinking about planning as being a future land use element, a transportation element, a housing element, a utilities element, etc., instead we need to think about what are the communities that we're building. This starts to talk about how you build a community, not how you write a plan. And I think that's one of the difficulties with Chapter 163 and the process we have. It is a checklist. It does not guarantee good plans. The truth about planning is better than not planning. If we don't believe that, then I'm not sure why we'd be here. You can't be forced, even by law, to do good planning. We can find many examples of plans in Florida that are not good plans. Fortunately, many of them have not had any growth for a number of years, so it hasn't mattered a great deal. But a lot of your small communities adopted a plan back in 1991, haven't changed it, haven't done anything to it. Many of the others have begun to really do some important things with planning. But there's no way to force a good planning. And even if we didn't have the requirement, in my view, of comprehensive planning as a mandate, many communities would still do good planning because they see the value of it locally. And more importantly, there's more than one good outcome. I didn't mean to suggest when talking about these principles that will produce the same thing every time. I often, when I talk to groups, I'm working with a community or whatever, I try to say, my job as a professional planner is not to tell you what your vision is. My job is to help you implement your vision. Every community may have different visions. There's more than one outcome, and they still might meet all of those principles. And very importantly, planning is too important to leave with planners. People are essential ingredient. Now, one thing we know Floridians will agree on: urban sprawl is bad, and density is worse. Now, this produces a housing policy that one of the home builders in Hillsborough County used this term. He said, we actually have a policy in Florida that's drive till you qualify. And if you didn't realize what I was trying to say here, is these are counterintuitive. These are mutually exclusive concepts. You can't not have sprawl and not have density. I don't mean that it's got to be 20, 30 units an acre, but they have to be more, this goes to a compact design. And I think what I'm simply trying to suggest here Instead of this kind of thing, I like 1,550 feet from nothing. That's a walking distance anyway. You may not be able to realize that. This is Key West, are you? Narrow streets, short blocks, tight radii, great plazas, beautiful buildings, limited parking, and it was built by pirates. But we can't get this approved many times. I thought I had a slide. Yeah, let me see. Yeah, we could get this approved. This is changing, you realize, but it's not changing very, very fast. You can get this approved all day long, and can't get this approved. Many examples of that, particularly in your area here, where this is happening. Right. Now, the planner's dilemma, and I'm using the term planner very broadly here, is how do you balance the citizens, the law, the property rights, the development, etc., in a responsible way and a responsible way. Very difficult to do. Amendment 4, in effect, says, well, we're just going to vote on all of it. I think that most people in the planning professions understand the sentiment there. We wish the process worked better, but we have serious reservations about whether this would allow that to happen. What we're really saying is, if you really want a successful plan, there are 4 key elements. 1, you begin with the public. You establish a vision, you weigh each decision you make against that vision, and you make it easy to do the right thing. Instead of a process that probably is at the ballot box with very little information and misinformation in many cases, we believe very strongly that the process needs to be participatory and inclusive. And in the Chinese proverb, it says, tell me I forget, show me I remember, and involve me I understand. How we do that is the challenge. It's a very difficult issue, a very difficult thing to do. Okay. I'm ready to answer any questions about that. And my intent was to try to give you some sort of a framework for planning in Florida that leads to the other discussions that take place. But I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you might have with me.